The principles of success from the art of the deal. Our goal here isn't really to praise it or judge it, but more like an intellectual extraction. We've looked at the original rules, the motivational stuff, and importantly, some really sharp critiques of it all.
Yeah, we're trying to give you the shortcut, basically. Distill what might work, what probably doesn't, and what the sort of built-in limits are with this kind of transactional thinking. We've broken it down into 4 main themes from the sources: mindset, strategy, perception, and leverage. The aim is for you, listening, to get some actionable ideas and, crucially, the context you need to decide how, or even if, you'd use these ideas yourself.
And the immediate hook, the core idea that jumps out from all this material, it's a pretty powerful challenge. The sources suggest the biggest trap isn't failing, it's actually mediocrity that looks like safety. I mean, that line alone makes you rethink things, doesn't it? Okay, so let's unpack the kind of mindset you'd need to reject that mediocrity. It all seems to start with this foundational idea, rule number 2. Think big. Now, at first glance, that sounds like, just a slogan on a poster.
Right.
But the sources actually break down the cold logic behind it.
It's surprisingly efficient logic, actually. The analysis suggests thinking big lets you achieve way more success without a whole lot more work. It's really an argument about structure, about overhead. Like the example given is managing apartments.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Right. The effort involved legal, accounting, staffing to manage, say, 50 units is almost the same as managing 1,200. The admin work is similar, but the potential profit and the leverage you get later, totally different scale.
And that idea of scale, it feeds right into marketing and perception too, doesn't it? Which is probably why thinking big often involves, hyperbole. The sources mentioned that plan back in the 80s for the world's tallest building. Apparently the press didn't really care about the financial details or the zoning stuff. They just latched onto the spectacle of the biggest.
Exactly. And that kind of proves that spectacle, even exaggeration, can be a vital marketing tool. If you're spending money to promote something, you want people talking about it, right? There's that quote in one source from Al Rees, the marketing guy.
It's better to be first than it is to be better.
That's the one.
No.
Because better is subjective, But
Right.
first, that's subjective. People remember first.
Okay, but if you're operating at that scale, you need a way to cut through all the noise, all the data. Which brings us to the next part of the mindset. Trust your instincts. Now, for a lot of us who like metrics and reports, just trusting your gut, it feels risky. So how do the sources say you develop an instinct that's actually reliable, not just wishful thinking?
Well, the sources are pretty clear. It's not some mystical thing. It's an instinct you develop by, actually talking to people, the vendors, the guys running the elevators, maybe even the taxi driver, getting a real ground level feel for the market. The criticism here is aimed right at that sort of corporate inertia.
You mean relying on fancy surveys and committees?
Exactly. Relying on those things, or outside consultants. It's often what insecure people do to avoid making a tough call. An informed gut feeling. It's faster, more decisive.
And sometimes the gut tells you to walk away, right? Like that example of the oil investment deal. Huge pressure to join, powerful partners, everything looked good on paper.
But it just didn't feel right. That's what the source says. And trusting that feeling, walking away, meant avoiding bankruptcy just months later. Sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't make.
It's interesting how that ability to read the room, or maybe read the invisible market, was applied politically too. Like in 2016, the experts were all looking at polls for states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
The blue wall.
Right. And the data said they were solid for one side. But the sources suggest there was this intuitive read, a gut feeling about what they call invisible blue-collar workers that suggested something else entirely.
So that reliance on instinct, it was almost a way to bypass the traditional polls, which often miss people who aren't typically engaged or economically struggling. It was seeing a feeling, a latent sentiment that the data wasn't capturing.
Recognizing an audience that the established systems had basically stopped listening to.
Okay, so you got the mindset. But what fuels the effort? What keeps it going long term? That's where passion and sheer tenacity come in. The sources really emphasize that the real driver isn't the money. It's the internal thing, the thrill of the chase.
Yeah, it really has to be internal, doesn't it? The quote says it flat out. I don't do it for the money. I do it because I love it. So for you listening, the idea is you almost have to gamify the tough parts. Turn those endless sales calls or learning something difficult into a personal challenge. Then the pressure becomes flow. The work itself is the reward, so you just keep going.
And that keep going part is literally rule 8. Sheer perseverance. The sources basically say a lot of success happens just because someone didn't give up. Look at how the land for Trump Tower was acquired. The owner just wasn't interested in selling. Period.
So what happened?
The letters just kept coming, polite requests, over and over, for 3 years, until the management changed. And the new guys saw this relentless persistence and finally said, okay, let's make a deal.
Wow, 3 years. But okay, being relentless takes resources. So you also need patience, right? That's rule 10. Be patient. If a deal doesn't feel quite right, price, location, whatever you wait, the analysis says waiting isn't just doing nothing, it's knowing the market will eventually give you another shot, if you're ready.
Absolutely. They waited years before jumping into the casino business. They saw how profitable it could be way back when Hilton's stock dropped because of a strike, but instead of rushing in, they waited, watched the market, until the perfect Atlantic City opportunity came along. That's patience, but it's active patience, guided by constantly watching.
And while you're waiting, while you're persisting, you've got to watch the bottom line. Rule 7, watch your pennies. What's interesting here is it's not just about, like, saving on coffee. It's about stopping huge financial risks in big contracts before they start.
That's exactly right. It's about controlling costs before they spiral. The sources give a specific warning. Never sign a construction contract until the building plans, the blueprints, are totally finished, 100% done.
Why is that so critical?
Because if the plans aren't final, the contractor knows they've got you over a barrel. Every little change you make later, even minor stuff, they bill you crazy amounts for it, maybe 50% over market rate, because you're locked in. So master the details first, and you avoid getting bled dry by change orders later.
Okay, let's shift into strategy now. Specifically, how do these really big thinkers manage risk? How do they stay bold without just being reckless?
Right, this is key. And it brings us to the core strategy. Protect the downside. This is like the #1 question before any big move. If everything goes totally wrong, can I survive? The sources hammer this point. Boldness is calculated. It's not a blind gamble. If the answer is yes, you can survive the worst case, then you go all in aggressively. If no, you wait or you restructure the deal.
It's like courage, but with insurance built in. So for you, the listener, this means having that emergency fund set aside or having liquid assets or just a solid fallback plan figured out before you take the leap. When you know you can survive the fall, that fear that paralyzes most people, it kind of disappears.
Yeah.
And you can fight a lot harder.
And protecting yourself like that demands what the sources call a mastery of reality. Dreams mean nothing without data. You have to know the zoning laws, the logistics, the legal loopholes, the local politics, know it better than anyone. That knowledge is what turns raw risk into something you can actually calculate.
The Woolman Ring story is the perfect example of this, isn't it? The city of New York fumbled around for 6 years trying to rebuild it, tangled in red tape, costs ballooning.
And he gets it done in 6 months.
6 months. Why? Because, as the sources lay out, he mastered the nitty-gritty details, the city's specific rules for buying concrete and steel, the exact zoning allowances, the logistics that the city committees just couldn't seem to grasp. It wasn't just throwing money at it, it was using obscure knowledge like a weapon.
And that weaponized knowledge, it's perfectly timed to exploit chaos. Chaos, any kind of crisis, it's like the great equalizer in business. The sources remind us that every crash, every downturn, whether it's 2008 or, the uncertainty during the pandemic, it hits the reset button. Visionaries use those moments. When competitors are frozen stiff with fear, they make bold moves, often snapping things up at bargain prices. When everyone else is hunkering down, waiting for things to feel safe, you're out there building ships.
Okay, let's talk about perception, image, influence. Because a lot of this strategy seems to start not just with the facts on the ground, but with projecting success. The analysis really hammers this. Perception is power. It is leverage. You have to act successful before you are. That confidence becomes currency, opening doors long before the actual money shows up.
Yeah, your whole environment sends signals, your office, your tone of voice, even your website, it all has to broadcast the level of ambition you have. If you project confidence, capability, people are just naturally inclined to believe you're worth their time, worth their investment.
And once you've got that image working for you, you use it to gain leverage. That's rule 5. Leverage means having something could be real, could be just perceived that the other side really wants, or at least thinks they want.
The casino example illustrates this perfectly, how perception becomes leverage. So the goal was to partner with Holiday Inn for a casino project. He needed them to believe the casino was almost done, suggesting they'd see returns quickly.
But it wasn't close to finish, was it?
Not even close. Construction had barely begun, so the order went out and makes the site look like the busiest one in the world. Trucks driving around, workers everywhere, lots of noise. just creating an illusion that confirmed what the Holiday Inn execs already kind of wanted to believe about this developer, fast, aggressive, that manufactured perception.
Yeah.
That was the leverage in the negotiation.
Wow. That's really managing expectations, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when you're selling the final product, especially a high-end one, we get to rule 6.
Yeah.
Selling premium. It's about status, exclusivity, particularly for wealthy buyers.
Right. And the psychology here is pretty interesting. When a competitor priced their apartments lower than Trump Tower, apparently he was relieved. The sources point out that studies show when something costs significantly more, people often just automatically assume it's better quality. For wealthy buyers, a bargain isn't always attractive. It can signal compromise. You're not selling square footage, you're selling status.
Okay, but what about when things get confrontational? The tactics seem to shift again. Rule 3 says be bold. It even argues that controversy sells. But doesn't that risk pushing away partners or clients who prefer stability and predictability?
Oh, it absolutely carries that risk. But the sources frame it as a calculation for a short-term transactional win. The example they use is destroying those valuable art sculptures during the Trump Tower demolition.
Right, that caused a huge uproar.
Exactly. Immediate, massive negative press. But the result? Instant, widespread attention that, according to the sources, actually boosted apartment sales. For that type of deal, the thinking is bad publicity can be better than no publicity. It's a deliberate choice, crossing an ethical line maybe, for huge, immediate visibility.
And if you do get criticized, then you use Rule 4. Shift attention. The idea being don't get bogged down endlessly debating the negative point that just makes it seem more important. Instead, the strategy is to smoothly pivot the conversation to something positive, something related, where you have the upper hand.
And finally, negotiation strategy, Rule 9. The sources describe this almost instinctive rhythm. First, talk constantly about your strengths, your wins, how rare and valuable what you offer is. Then second, step back and immediately hammer on the other side's weaknesses, why their offer isn't really worth that much from your point of view. It's a classic dominance play, designed to make the other side feel kind of small, lucky to even be negotiating with you.
That is quite the playbook. Very aggressive, very focused on winning each transaction. But we promised balance. We had to look at the critiques found in these sources too, because just applying these rules blindly today, well, it could be a disaster.
Yeah, the criticisms are significant and they really come down to context. A major point from the sources is that this whole approach, the bluffing, the dominance, the hype, it was perfected in a very specific world. The high stakes, often one-off deals of New York real estate back then.
And that word transactional is key, isn't it? Because this style seems completely opposite to how effective negotiation is taught in practice now. Modern business focuses on building long-term relationships, mutual gain.
Exactly. So much of modern business is about recurring revenue, stable supply chains, transparency, trust between partners. If your main goal is just to dominate the other side in one deal, you wreck the trust and reputation you need for those essential long-term relationships. The critics point out that the book highlights the flashy wins, but conveniently doesn't mention major business failures.
Failures which often happen because this aggressive approach burned too many bridges.
That's the argument. The sources specifically note the lack of discussion about things like Trump Airlines, Trump University, the Taj Mahal Casino, ventures that ended up in bankruptcy or lawsuits or just dissolved. The critique is essentially that this model can create brilliant but ultimately unstable short-term successes. They don't last.
There's also the communication strategy to consider.
Right. We should definitely acknowledge that. The sources point out that despite an elite education, the public communication style is often very simple, very direct. Some compare it to a fourth grade reading level. And the analysis suggests this wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate choice to prioritize clarity, make the message understandable to the absolute widest audience, especially maybe blue-collar workers who often feel alienated by academic jargon or corporate speak.
So the takeaway isn't necessarily that the methods don't work in some contexts, but that they come with potentially huge ethical costs, huge relational costs. You have to weigh those against your long-term goals. For every quick win, you might be sacrificing the goodwill needed to thrive later on, especially in today's more relationship-focused economy.
Which brings us right back to that central tension, that dichotomy. Pursuing a massive vision often does require calculated risks, requires constant maneuvering, but you have to balance that boldness against the need for a sustainable reputation, especially in a business world that increasingly values mutual, long-lasting gain.
So let's leave you with a final thought, a provocation drawn from all this. The system, whether it's corporate life or politics, often rewards compliance. It prefers predictability. It wants small thinking. It wants you to stay on that path that looks like safety.
Your challenge then is to question that default path. Maybe stop asking only what's the worst that happens if I fail, and start asking, have I genuinely protected my downside so I can survive the worst outcome?
Because at the end of the day, you really have two choices. You either build your own game, think big, act bold, but always protect your downside, or you'll probably spend your life building someone else's vision instead.